This week on A to Z Running, two more athletes talk about success and satisfaction and what it looks like to be comfortable in the mess and perform well.
And we answer a question about preparing for a 50K race.
In the world of running, new standalone 25K records were set in Kolkata.
3 Japanese men broke a national record in the same race.
And NIL deals are continuing to make news and getting more complicated.
All this and more on A to Z Running. Welcome back to A to Z Running, where we help runners thrive with information, inspiration, and coaching and training services. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach, and just a reminder that you can learn more about our services and support for runners at AtoZrunning.com and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. And someone drove past me today while I was running
Okay.
and shouted out the window. People shout at runners a lot. There's this thing about shouting at runners. Like, for some reason, because someone's running on the road, sidewalk, doesn't really matter. Because they're running, they're a prime candidate or audience for whatever thought is in my mind. And somewhat captive audience because, they're not really able to not hear me unless their earphones are too loud.
Wait, you're the one yelling at the runners?
No.
Oh.
Someone yelled at me. And
Okay.
it just made me pause to remember that this is kind of like a thing, and it's been a thing, I think, since the very beginning of, it goes all the way.
Vehicles, horses.
Well, it goes all the way back to Forrest Gump, right? And maybe that's when it all started.
Yeah,
in the
it was
movie.
happening before that.
No, you think so? Okay.
I think people would ride by on horses. Someone's running along, be like, "Hey, don't you wish you had this horse?"
That's not really the point that I'm making.
Okay.
It's like just whatever the thing is that I feel like that runner needs to hear. Because it's a runner, I am much more likely to yell it at them than if it was just...
So it was another runner who yelled at you today?
No, it was someone driving in a car who yelled at me, and actually it was a positive thing. So she yells out. She actually didn't yell either. She was very close to me because I was in the road and she was driving past me on the one side. And she said, "Thank you for being visible." And I was quite visible. I was wearing one of those vest things that has the neon tubes all over it and is like flashing. I looked like a Christmas tree running in the middle of the street, which I thought to myself, most of the year, that is an impossible to miss sight. Like just basically this Christmas tree that's running. But then I remembered that those are all over the place right now with everyone's Christmas lights, decorations. So maybe the reason why people are still finding it possible to hit me, despite the fact that I'm lit up like a Christmas tree, is because they just think I blend in with all the rest of the Christmas decorations everywhere.
Could be.
Which is the only possible excuse for why someone would do that. But anyway, thanks to the lady who's thanked me for being all lit up and stuff, because, that's why I'm doing it, so that you see me. It's not like it's a fashion statement or anything.
Sure.
Not for me.
You like to twinkle.
I don't have anything to say to that. So everyone listening right now is just really hoping that we're going to move on from this. So let's do just that and get started with your questions.
Thanks to Carol, who sent us this question via email. She is running a 50K at age 65, and she says, "I'm looking for some advice, hoping you can help." She's turning 65 in October, and she wants to celebrate by running her first 50K at the end of the month.
I love runners.
I love that. Yeah.
I'm turning an age, and so I want to celebrate it by running more. That's a thing that runners tend to do quite a bit, and it entertains me immensely.
She writes, "The race I have picked is rails to trails, so it's flat. I have run many marathons. I'm comfortable with that distance, and although it's not much longer, it's still new, and I want to be as prepared as possible. Any suggestions for me? Thanks, and love your podcast." Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
So
congrats on the new milestone.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I love these kinds of things. We have many athletes who enjoy having certain birthdays be new events for them. So
or other kinds of commemorations. It's like, I'm going to this new place, so I'm going to run the mountain that's famous there, or like all the stuff. Runners are just we're a lot of fun.
Sure. So to give you some perspective, the 50K is 31 miles and the marathon is, of course, 26.2.
Yeah, you're talking 5 more. It's 8K. 42K is a marathon. 50K is 5 miles more.
So for a 50K, you're going to need the same ingredients. And so those are the musculoskeletal resilience. You want to have good neuromuscular activation, so all of your muscles are recruiting in the way that you need for the longevity of the race. And then also you need to have high aerobic capacity. So those are the key ingredients.
Yeah, so this course that you mentioned, Carol, is one of those like bike paths types of thing that's like flat and straight, I'm assuming, because you said it's a rail to trail, which is what those are. So the only other side of all of this is make sure that you spend a fair bit of time running on like
gravel,
flat and straight routes that are this similar type of terrain. Yeah, if it's paved, then pave. If it's not paved, then especially if it's like gravel, only because it's a long time, and if that type of thing at a higher load is not familiar to your body, it could be uncomfortable and especially fatiguing.
So we suggest with all of our training for long distance events, the marathon, half marathon and such, to have many weeks of a long run. So there are a lot of training programs that don't have you running consistently the longer long run, and we do even for our half marathon 10K because you need to be able to build up that resistance and fatigue resistance as well. So not only for your body, but also for your systems. And it becomes increasingly important the longer that you're out for your race. And because you are out that extra 5 miles, I want to make sure that we mention that you have this part of our recommendation, and that is to be doing consistent long running for many weeks.
Yeah. So as you know, the important element of load and volume is just structural resilience. It's strengthening your body. And in this particular instance, that's the key here. It does not matter your aerobic potential in a sense, insofar as your muscles and bones can handle the thing for a long period of time. That's the perspective in general with ultra running, by the way. You're not ignoring aerobic training, but the point is you need to have that. And so the best way to build that is through consistent volumes over time. That's what Andy is saying. And we have often railed against the silly approach where you like build up your long run until you're 2 or 3 weeks before your key race, and that's when you hit like your longest run. And it's like, first of all, how silly is that, where you get to like your most strenuous thing that you do just a few weeks before the race, and you do it once or maybe twice. It's like, well, you're achieving almost no adaptations from that in only 1 or 2 instances. You need to be doing that like over time to achieve those adaptations. The second thing is you're doing the most extreme thing in close proximity to the race, which is, again, something to be avoided as a runner. And then the final point here, which pertains directly to your situation, Carol, is that you need the resilience, which you achieve by slight amounts of stress, like small stresses repeated over time. And that's what the volume is for. And so 8 weeks of a consistent 2.5 to 3 hour long run is going to do you wonders, especially if you're training additional days. You don't want to just do that and no other running. That's not generally advisable. But keep up a sustained running load. Don't overdo it with that, but something that's manageable, and just make sure key emphasis on that long run.
Mm-hmm. And as always, and I'm sure you know this, Carol, because you are a veteran marathon runner, but make sure that you are fueling and hydrating properly, not just for your race and practicing for your race, but make sure that in your daily life, you're getting the nutrition that you need to support your long distance running. It becomes increasingly important as the distances go up as well, because your body's needs are higher. So I wanted to make sure I plug that part of it, because we all need to be told that, even if we know it. So we all need to be told staying healthy is the priority to be able to complete a race like this. And also when it comes down to the actual race day, you need to be conservative in the beginnings. We always say that for every race, but because of the duration, you really do want to make sure that you're dialing it back even more than you think you need to in the early stages.
Right on. Always remember that recovery is paramount here to be able to get to the day feeling good and being ready. So on that side of it, but also, keep your efforts low enough that you can do this basically at a daily rate and not feel like you're sore, not feel like you're especially fatigued, or fatigue is mounting over time, increasing over time.
And if you are able to increase your load during this cycle for your 50K, make sure that you are doing all the mobility and the supportive routines for your healthy lifestyle, because I personally, I have joint issues, and if I'm not mobilizing while I increase any amount of load, I suffer for it. So just make sure that you're getting in your mobility, even with increased time on feet. Perhaps you might not need to. I don't know what you're doing at this very moment, but if you do increase loads, that's another thing to consider.
Right on. Anything else?
I think that's all I have for now.
Carol, we appreciate your question, and we're thrilled for you in another new venture. One of the things we love about running in general is that there's always something else we could try as runners. As we never really fully exhaust, well, I guess there are some out there who have done it all. That may be true. But for the rest of us, it's a new moment in your life as well as a new opportunity in your running experience. We wish you the best.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's get on to something else helpful. Just a reminder that if you want to share your questions, I should have said this earlier and didn't. However, you should send in your questions all the time and anytime. And you can do that in the easiest way possible. Whatever you find a place where we are, share the question, message us, comment on the things, any of that, and we see all of it. But namely, the easiest way for everyone is to go to AtoZrunning.com/question or email us questions@AtoZrunning.com.
Very good. We'd love to hear from you. Well, this week we get to hear from some guests, and we're very excited about this series that we have done and to bring you even more thoughts in regards to effort-based training. So our overall focus today is how to achieve success today, like the purpose, what you're supposed to do.
Yes. So in spirit of what we've been trying to accomplish, we're bringing the specific experiences of athletes who have been implementing these things, and why, as a brief reminder, going back to, I don't remember the last time I actually said this, it was right at the beginning, because as we find when we start talking about these concepts, training approaches and things like that, we're talking at a theoretical idea level most of the time, and we try to give practical examples. But in reality, every single time a runner does these types of things, like train, it looks a little differently. And so we're trying to say, okay, we could probably bring to you enough of these experiences that you see something that you're like, that's like me. I do that type of thing or relate to that type of experience. And so we're trying to kind of do just that, is bring just a lot of different ones. And so our own athletes have been so generous and willing to share their thoughts and experiences. And just so you know, we didn't specifically select athletes and say, you should share because of this reason and you should share because of this reason. We just simply said to all of them who wants to, who's willing to, and we weren't, we can't feature every single one all of the time, but we took the first several that were willing. And so as it goes, you get then a kind of we are not trying to guide these conversations to a certain point or to a certain end. We are simply asking the question and giving the athlete a chance to share the experience. Mm-hmm. So hopefully you're getting something from it so far. We're going to be wrapping it up soon. We've got just a few more in the hopper, and then we'll be able to basically kind of put a cap on what we feel like has been a very practical time for everyone and move on to a new topic as well. But for now, as Andy said, we really want to try to address the idea of success. And that's something that, as you've heard different athletes sharing some thoughts, there's been a various different kinds of approaches to that in kind. Here, we think we have some even more direct thoughts in the form of Kyle and Laura and their experiences.
So let me introduce them. Kyle this year has run PRs and everything from the 5K to the half marathon multiple times over. And so he has been part of our program for a couple years now, and it's been thrilling to see him progress. And then we have...
And he's going to, I would want to interrupt briefly, he's going to specifically talk about how he got to that point. Like what it has meant for him to move from the beginning of the stages of things where things weren't necessarily always going according to plan and it wasn't really like happening perfectly and ideally, to how do I now make this happen at such a level as he has. That's going to be really interesting.
Similarly, Laura has hit a number of PRs and ran her very first marathon this year.
Debut.
Woohoo!
And you might have called it a successful debut.
It was a great debut.
And one of the keys that you should look for as you listen to Laura sharing some thoughts is how she has specifically had to take this approach and fit it into a kind of life approach in terms of the training and such, that it didn't feel like it naturally fit. Like these things were kind of not totally aligned initially. How can I, and the way I do things and the way I think about things, do this training successfully? And this is fascinating. Laura has some really key insights to share. So let's get started with Kyle. We want to first just answer the question, or Kyle's going to answer the question, how did the approach help him be successful? And start kind of getting into his experiences here. How do you feel like the principles, as we've discussed, things like training by effort and trying to become more intuitive as a runner, how do you feel like that has contributed to your progress, or what's involved in that?
Well, overall, I point to the entire plan is the result, is driving the results. And so if I were to take a step back and say what has training by effort done, it's two things. It's sort of allowed me to focus on what I'm supposed to do. And it also removes a lot of doubt or any of the, I guess, questions that you'd have going into a training. And it also sort of helps you focus on this is what you're supposed to do. And so when you go into a training plan, or when I go to it, I just know what I'm supposed to do every day, nothing more, nothing less, focus on that. And then you either get it done as you're happy with it, or you're like, oh, that could have gone differently, and then adjust next time. And so it's never going to be perfect each time, but what did you learn from it to sort of take on to the next one? I think when people first start out training by effort, they have in their mind, and I did this too, is what effort should translate to. And the key thing I found was it shouldn't translate to anything. It should translate to you did the workout and you felt this way or you felt that way. And that way usually was bad. This way usually was good. And so was that how it should be? And so I think when you start trying to validate the workout, you're sort of hurting yourself. And I think that's what you have to sort of get over, that initial hump, is trying to validate the effort that you put in by the metrics that we've all been sort of taught or thought leading into any sort of running. I mean, when you first start out running, and even now, people say, what's your time? What's this? What pace do you run? And yeah, that's good, but it can get in the way of all the other stuff. The other thing is it takes a lot of the pressure off in terms of what am I supposed to do today? What does this next day look like? What does this week look like? How hard is this workout going to be? What am I going to feel like? And if you know the effort, yeah, there's going to be hard days because you got to do hard workouts, but at least you go in knowing this is the effort I'm going to give. This is what I have for that day. And so overall, that's sort of the thing, the key components of it. And I think the key, as I've found, is you really start getting a grasp of it when you go through all of the efforts, because then you can kind of see at one end of the spectrum, this was really good. I dialed this in, or I might have went too hard here because I wasn't able to sustain it for the time period, or, whatever. And so I think um, once you sort of are able to sort of keep building on that progress, that's when it sort of really starts to kick in. And then just be honest with yourself, I think is one of the keys is, was my run easy today? Did I really do it steady? Did I do harder than it should be? Did I do, and nothing else should sort of be that judge besides how you felt and how you felt the effort was. And once I get over that, that's when it really clicked, for me. And that's, I think, one of the harder things is because it's not the natural place that you come at from running just based on history of how running is judged. So I think there's that initial hurdle to get over all the stuff that you've sort of built up prior to that.
Kyle, thank you for sharing those thoughts and in confirming that this arbitrary concept of training, is in fact something that we can do. That sense of knowing what you're supposed to do is not only possible, but as he expressed, like you can actually know what it feels like to do it right. And so then this like effort-based approach that everyone sounds like, oh, that just sounds like who knows exactly what, on a given day, you don't have a watch on it, so how can you know? You don't have a pace, so what are you doing? That there's actually something more concrete than that that's possible. I appreciate that, Kyle. Thank you.
Next, let's hear from Laura.
How did the approach appeal, or is it something you had to adjust to as you started?
Yeah, I think it was both. So I knew when I reached out to you guys initially, this was going to be a heavier training load than anything I'd ever done before. So a couple of things that were baked into that for me. One was I had to be on board with the distinction between motivation and dedication. So traditionally, I had kind of come in and out of training for different 5Ks or half marathons here and there, but I wasn't ever super dedicated to a training program. I just kind of ran based on my motivation level over time, so it ebbed and flowed. But I knew that working with you guys, it was going to be a much higher training load, and I needed to make that switch to where I was dedicated to the training program, regardless of whether I felt motivated or not on any given day. I needed to be a little bit more committed to the process. And not that that doesn't mean there are days where, you adjust the schedule on the fly and that sort of thing. But it was just a mindset shift it wasn't based on how I felt. It was based on what there was to do and what my body felt capable of on any given day. So that was the main thing. I would say also, I had never trained based on effort before. So that was a huge shift. And I think part of it, there is a lot of trial and error that goes along with it. I've had a lot of conversations with you and Zach about, what exactly different effort categories should feel like. I've spent a lot of time on that part of your website, reading through the descriptions of different levels of effort to try to make sure that I'm in the right zone for each of the different categories. But it is trial and error. And I've gotten more comfortable with that process, that there's no one specific, it's a really broad range within each category. And there are certain guardrails. One of the key things I remember when I first talked to you and Zach was you guys explained that on the easy days, especially the jogging days, you can't mess it up by going too easy. You can only mess it up by going too hard. And that was huge for me to know that there was a guardrail there, on the hard side. I cannot mess this up by going too easy. That was really an epiphany for me, that all my goal was to build the time on feet and serve the purpose of that particular day. And that was a new way of thinking about it for me. But then the trial and error part of figuring out the effort for each different type of workout, it's an ongoing process. And I feel like it's different from day to day, even because, for example, you and I have talked about how the effort for, a steady run, for example, it should be not so hard that I'm not feeling recovered for the next workout day that I have, whether that's, however many days down the road. So depending on the frequency of the hard days, the amount of effort I should be putting into a particular workout day might fluctuate, on any given day. So it's less about trying to perfectly nail something, and it's more about fulfilling the purpose of each day, and making sure that you're in the right range and kind of getting comfortable with the ambiguity of that and recognizing that it's fulfilling the purpose that's intended, even if you don't have a time on your watch to reaffirm that. It's getting comfortable with that sense of success.
So Laura's talking about the trial and error, and I have no doubt that, especially her kind of final point there, getting comfortable with the ambiguity is not something, as many runners hear that's like, that sounds like something I really want to do. I really want to train in a way that's kind of ambiguous and go through a bunch of trial and error and hope it works out and such. So thankfully, that's not actually where the comment ended. We wanted to pause here for a moment, break it up. We're going to come back to Laura here, but there's an obvious implication to the whole thing, but in Laura's comments there, this thing is not straightforward. It is not simple, but that may in fact be an asset. And so now, having that thought in mind, couple that with this sense as a runner that we crave progress. We desire success and to see it and tangibly measure it. And that's part of, not every runner is this way. And not every runner is this way all the time either. Case in point, there may in fact be someone sitting at this table talking to you right now who has seen a substantial shift in the way he has approached these concepts. But the point is, we desire that. We want to know that we're not just doing the thing, but we're headed somewhere with it. And Laura has something to tell us about that.
How was it for you to adjust to this? And was that a challenge? And what were some things that you discovered as you went through this process?
Yeah, it was very much a challenge because you finish a steady run and, I still have the data on my watch. It's not supposed to be driving my effort level on any given day, but, of course I look at it after a steady run and I'm like curious, what were my paces? Does that make sense? Can I rationalize that for being in the steady zone? How was I feeling? What did my heart rate look like? All of those things. But it is challenging that you don't have a clearly defined success or failure for a given workout. But I think over time, it's gotten to it's so much more of a success-oriented approach, I feel like, training by effort, because when you're training by pace, it seems like 99 times out of 100, you're not going to nail it exactly. Maybe some people do, but it's a really narrowly defined success rate. So you're prescribed, a workout to hit certain paces. And then for any number of variables, many of which would be out of your control on any given day, the weather, your sleep, your kids waking you up all night, anything, it could be any number of things. I feel like every workout you're justifying why you didn't hit the paces. And there are plenty of legitimate reasons. Whereas training by effort, it's a much broader target of success because your job is to put in the effort, whatever that looks like, and be within some range of the prescribed effort level. And it doesn't matter if that's faster or slower from day to day. It's a much broader target to hit. So you're starting from the standpoint of, I don't know, it's easier to feel like you're succeeding in nailing that and nailing each day. Because you can put in that effort, even if it's slower than you'd like it to be. The effort is what matters. So I feel like I come away from my workout days feeling a lot more successful, even though it was an adjustment, not having it clearly defined. Like my watch wasn't telling me, yay, you ran, XYZ pace, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do. It's not as clearly defined, but you get comfortable with it and you start to feel more satisfied with the results, I feel like.
If you're going to take something away from this conversation, this could be a nugget to take away. Whoa. It was a great way to describe the approach that we have and what we can gain from it in the day-to-day, the intangible way, that satisfaction that we all desire and long for. Feeling successful more often because we did the purpose of the work and we gained the adaptations. I love that. We are more successful. It's a success-based approach.
Yeah, and you have to, don't miss the importance of Laura being the one who says this. And in part, so obviously you don't know the full context of who Laura is and all of her experiences, but Laura is one who would initially ask us, like, tell me what this needs to look like, because I want to do this thing well. I want to do it in a way that is going to be successful, and I need to see what that means. And then for us to come back and answer questions like that and say things like, we're not going to tell you exactly what it needs to be. But there is a way, and that's the key. That's huge. Success is clear, but it's not in the same exact sense as we have so often interpreted it as runners. And that, in some sense, as Laura was expressing, actually makes it not only more attainable, like we know how to be successful in a much more reliable way with this kind of an approach. It also makes it more satisfying.
Absolutely. Think of it. If you were up all night working on a project, or you had a kid that was throwing up and you needed to take care of them, and you're tired, okay? And you go and you have a hard effort the next day, and that effort yields a less than desirable data result, okay? You might say, I had a bad workout. But with this approach, you put in the correct amount of effort for the duration that it called for. And you had success that day no matter what the watch says, because you are getting adaptations that are going to move you forward towards your goal. So it was a successful day. In fact, it's very victorious to be able to come away after sleepless nights or whatever it is that's in your life that's disturbing how you feel physiologically and mentally.
Yeah. So we talk about this all the time. We want two things for you as a runner. If there's anything we can influence, we want to be able to influence both of these things. One is we want you to be able to be a better runner on account of the things that we share on this podcast. It's part of why we do it. We also are fairly convinced that every single thing we say is going to help you be a better runner.
Zach.
No, it's true. Otherwise, we wouldn't say it, right? Like at some level. And obviously, Zach sometimes jokes about, well, it's not really a joke. We do happen to have all the answers. But if we didn't, at the very least, we believe that when we get to the point of here's an idea we want to share, it's because we think that idea can help you be a better runner. Otherwise, why would we share it, right? Or sometimes it's just funny. But that's one side. That's not the whole picture. We also want you to be a more satisfied runner. We want you to thrive in your life broadly, insofar as running is a positive contribution to that. And that also means, you've heard us say it so many times, that sometimes the right answer is not running at a given moment in time, which is a piece of this puzzle. It's only one piece of it. But as Laura expressed, this idea that I can be more satisfied as a runner when I have a better way of measuring success. And this is one of those things that I can't tell you how many times this comes up in all the different parts and parcels and walks of life and my careers and various capacities, whether when I was a classroom teacher or the other things that we do. But the point is, when you can define success best in the best ways, it is much more fulfilling, much more satisfying. So Laura has helped point us in that direction so keenly. Thank you, Laura. Much appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
But we're actually missing one piece still right now, and that is most of what Laura was sharing was still at kind of at the idea level. And when it comes down to it, runners will often say to us, yeah, I'm there with you to a point. And that point is almost always not in the races. and so we get this like sense of, I get you, I'm following you, but I got to do it this way because I got to hit my Boston qualifier, or because at the end of the day, I got to try to run that personal best. And so I got to do it this way. Well, you don't have to do it that way. And how do I know this? Because Kyle has something to say to you and to all of us to just really help see what does this look like in a full picture. So let's wrap it up with Kyle.
You can do some things within there that sort of in the training or once you learn sort of are in this effort-based training that get you to a point of where you sort of like, well, I did all the training and I did all the effort, but now it's time to dial in a pace in a time that I want to hit. And that's where my mind, it sort of falls apart, is you sort of have to play where when it worked for me is when I started playing the effort all the way through the end. Is you can't like stop and then go back and say, well, today's the day I'm going to hit these paces or this time, because you're going to end up in one of two places. You're going to sabotage yourself because you're going to go slower than you could have because you wanted to hit a number that you're actually better than, or situations are going to be different that you're going to then freak out that you're behind, and who knows what will happen there. And that's happened to me. And I think then it leads you to this, nothing's ever going to go right. And, and so that's where I think in the mess sort of leads you to understanding how to change that. And in my mind, it's from those mistakes, you can kind of figure out what you need to do differently. But it tends to be, it comes from a place of wanting to sort of veer off because you're uncomfortable or something like that. And so that's, in my opinion, that's sort of like, that's what's helped me, is just stay the course. Everything will work out if, in the long term, if you continue just to sort of follow this course and stay with it.
And you kind of said it, but I want you to talk a little more about this and reflect a little more about this. You said, well, the pace isn't necessarily the thing that tells you if you're doing the right thing. So what does then? Like if you're in that race, Kyle, because you've
Mm-hmm.
done both, right? You've had some
Mm-hmm.
that you would have preferred to have done a different way or gone a different way, and you've had others that have come together fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
How are you executing that race without the pace and yet knowing that you're achieving what you can?
And I don't mean to, and this isn't, again, we didn't talk about this, but the answer is because I've done all the training and I know what the effort feels like. And so that took me a little bit to learn, but I know what that effort should feel like for how long I can maintain and whether I can push more and whether I can't push more. And I know it's like, it sounds like it's this magical, thing that appears at the end. And it's like, well, of course it's worked out for him. But I guess the main thing there is the more you do it, the more you'll sort of see that it plays out that way. Because in the end, I think you're going to be surprised by doing all this training by effort and getting a really intuitive sense of what that effort feels like and what you can do. It's going to produce what you want and probably more. And so that's where I would say is like, because you've seen it in training. And on the flip side, if you haven't seen it and felt it in training, don't all of a sudden expect um something magical to come because you set another pace and that you set some sort of goal that is not going to happen. And so that's what you're capable of doing at that time based on the training and everything you've done. And so I think it's a lot. It's sort of like, oh, train and race by sort of, for lack of a better word, faith in your training, but in your effort and intuition. But I really believe, and I've heard other even professionals, and even in your stories, I haven't looked at pace until at a certain point, or I didn't turn it. I don't know what I'm doing until X miles left. I haven't run with a pace on my watch in 3 years or however since we started running. Like the first thing I did when I started training with you guys is switch my training, on my watch face to no pace, no heart rate, no anything like that. And to me, if you look at some of the progress and stuff that I have, that's where all of a sudden it tracks in a different trajectory. So I know it's a long answer, but it sounds like I'm selling selling a certain way of doing it, but I believe that it does equal to that performance that you're going to want to get.
So if that hasn't convinced you yet, thank you, Kyle, again. And the point to never forget that this thing has implications in all aspects of what we do as a runner. And when we find the way to apply it well, you could say with fidelity to the different areas, we can see a kind of success that I think is better than necessarily a more narrowly defined sense. And the best way to say that is we always go back to the final point. It is absurd to think that a race's success should be defined by such a narrow and fickle end. Something like, I ran the time or not. Because there are so many other things involved in that. And if you get done with a race, no matter what the end result, and you know that you did everything you could possibly have done that day to achieve the best possible result, and you don't run that, quote, time you wish you had run, and then you say to yourself, well, that was a failure, that is absurd. It's a kind of failure, you could say, for sure, because you didn't achieve a thing that you were hoping to achieve. But to not be able to walk away from that satisfied that's tragic to us. So how do we have both? I think Kyle gave us the right answer to executing well. Laura gave us the right answer to achieving both, to finding satisfaction and being successful in the midst of the process and through that end result, whatever form it takes. And what else can we do as runners? That's kind of the thing.
I loved this conversation with Kyle and Laura, so thank you both for coming on. Now we're going to get on to the world of running. This week in the world of running, we're starting with a kind of a rare event, the 25K. Now, this was the fastest standalone 25K ever for both the men and the women. This was the Tata Steel Kolkata 25K.
Say that 5 times fast. Tata Steel Kolkata.
World Athletics Elite Label Road Race. So it did draw a lot of attention. There were some really great athletes, hence the fast times.
That's so when you hear something like World Athletics something label, gold label, elite label, there's a lot of different things. They're doing that in order to bring more attention and competitiveness to an event. They're trying to they've got a whole bunch of initiatives to expand running in various capacities. And one of them is to just simply add something to an event to elevate it. And this is a way to do it. More money now, more prize money, a little bit more value for the runner because it now contributes to their world ranking points in different ways, things like that.
Mm-hmm. On the men's side, the men's winner was Daniel Abenyo, and he ran a time of 1:11:13, winning by over a minute. So that's a substantial victory. He's won 2 silver medals from the World Championships, first in Budapest in the 10,000 and then the World Road Running Championships in the half marathon. And this was not the fastest ever run for the 25K, but the fastest for a standalone event. As I alluded to when we started this conversation, it was the second fastest, only behind Eliud Kipchoge's 1:11:08. He said
5 seconds.
Yeah. He set that en route to his world marathon record of 2:01:09 in Berlin last year.
Previous world marathon record, right? Because
Right.
Kelvin Kiptum broke that by only a small amount.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's ratified yet, though, right? Well, we don't
Oh.
know for sure.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to know. We don't know for sure if Kelvin Kiptum had an official timing mat for his 25K because he did run a really fast 25K and his world record as well. But it does need to have an official time to be called the 25K world best. Now, this is the 25K world best in the standalone event. So there's lots of tiers of things, but just know this is really fast.
Yep.
That's what you got to know. And on the women's side, it was also the story that we had a really fast time. Sutam Asefa Kebede ran 1:18:47, winning by 39 seconds over legendary Yellamsworth Joanna.
Yeah. Previous half marathon world record holder.
Yep. Yowala.
Yep.
She ran fast as well, but of course, we had a winner, Kebede, who improved the previous event record by a substantial amount. The previous event record was 1:21:04, and she ran 1:18:47. And what we could find from this World Athletics article was that the previous standalone time was 1:19:53, so improving the time by a minute, and that was back in 2010 by Mary Keatoney.
Yeah. So that's a long time. And it goes to show an event like this, 25K, doesn't generally get a lot of attention. So World Athletics to come in and give this event a higher label to bring more attention and competitiveness to it, well, it's paying off.
Mm-hmm.
Case in
Absolutely.
point.
Yeah. And I was doing a little digging because the article from World Athletics did not list this, but I wanted to know what the fastest time recorded for 25K is, the actual world best, and that was Ruth Chepngetich in the Chicago Marathon in 2022. She ran a time of 1:18:03.
And we were debating earlier off air that Tigista Sefa, when she set the 2:11 and change world record marathon in Berlin in 2023 here, just this year, there's a good chance she ran a faster 25K split in that one, but we don't actually know that for sure, and it may not have had an official split timing
Official
that,
timing that.
so hard to know.
And Safan Hassan has also run faster. I know that this isn't the second fastest ever 25K as it was for the men's, but again, fastest standalone.
Yeah, right on. Well, speaking of fast,
Right? We usually are talking about things that are fast, but this time on the track and this time in Japan, although that's not something that we are sharing as a novelty because the Japanese have been very fast, very, very fast for several years. But this year we talked about their youth and how they were just coming on really quick, and comparing that to our U.S. athletes who are the fastest that they've ever been. The Japanese were like another level and had significantly more athletes that were running these impressive times.
that's the big point. And anytime we bring this up, the reason why we're bringing it up as like a thing to know and to pay attention to is because as well, not just the level of competitiveness, the competitive edge, but the depth of competitiveness. There are not many places in the world where you can find this many fast runners concentrated in such a way. And so that by itself raises questions like what is going on that's fueling that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've talked about that a fair bit, and we've brought to you some of the reasons as other people seem to understand them. And this is just more proof of.
you mentioned this. I didn't write it down, but I remember because the article's fresh in my mind. You'd said, what other countries have this kind of depth? The only one that has the kind of depth the Japanese do for the 10,000, which we're about to talk about, is Kenya.
Yes.
It is the only other one that has the same amount of depth, more depth than the Japanese. So we're going to tell you a little bit about that right now because the Japanese had a really big event for the 10,000 meter run on the track. And on the women's side, we had Ricardo Hironaka of Japan running 30:55:29 to win the race. And the significant part of the women's race story is that 4 women went under 31 minutes. Previous to this race, there had only been 5 in history to go under 31, and now there are 8. So
one
that's
of them had already
significant.
done it before.
Right.
You do the math. And you're
Hironaka,
like, wait,
she
that's
was the
not-
only one that had done it before who won the race. She's the former 5,000 meter national record holder. And it was a really close race. It came down to the last 200 meters, which I think yields some of the best results as a collective when you are able to have like a really close race. It eggs on the competition, of course. It did have pacing lights. That was something that was mentioned, but
it was in the Olympic Stadium, right?
it was in the Olympic Stadium.
Tokyo
Mhm.
Stadium. It's got all the gear, all the finest and best that track racing has to offer.
Hironaka's time in this race was the fastest by a Japanese woman this year. And there were 12 personal bests in the race.
Amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
Well, on the men's side, similar story, fast running, but further still, not only lots of personal bests and fast times, but in fact, not just 1 or 2, but 3 Japanese men in one race all bested the previous national record. So here you have now a scenario where they're going so fast that anyone who wins this race is guaranteed this record. And 3 of them in close succession all did it, all bested it. In third place was 27:13. That was Akira Aziwa, sorry. And then in second place, 27:12, Tomoki Ota. And in first place with a new record, 27:09, was Kazuya Shiojiri. So that's
So
fast.
fast,
And close. And close. I mean, that's the, fourth place was about 9 seconds back, but still one of the top 5 10,000 meter performances all time. So like, that's just mad depth, and an incredible opportunity for them to come out and run in an event at this caliber, and it just speaks well for continuing the future of the sport.
Absolutely. And continuing the conversation on depth, 37 Japanese men this year in 2023 have broken 28 minutes in the 10,000 meter run.
So as Andy said, essentially there's kind of like a tier list of concentration of athletes. And so for the distance events, Kenya seems to own it in terms of depth.
I think they said 58
That sounds
Kenyan
about
men
right.
have run under 28 minutes.
Yep. Ethiopia is super fast, but not quite as deep. So this is one of the things that always gets interesting. You start to look at the performance list. It depends on the event. But it's Kenya, Ethiopia, and Japan. Head and shoulders above any other national centralization of athletes running fast. It's Kenya, Ethiopia, and Japan, and that's incredible. That's really something. So you're watching the world's best doing the thing that they do best, and that's a lot of fun. Now, last note for our World of Running.
It's a little
segment
different.
here.
It's a little shift.
Yeah, so we always want to bring you some kind of like general news as well. What are the things that are happening in the sport, and not just the performances and people running fast. So the NIL situation in the NCAA, that's the name, image, likeness contracts that these athletes are getting, has been a fascinating study on both evolving policy and shifting to try to meet shifting demands, but also the motivations behind these things for the brands. So let me give you the quick background. This comes from Outside Magazine. They did their homework. They really presented here in this article an exceptional comprehensive view of this idea as it currently stands. But as you know, you have scenarios where it's like, these high-performing athletes get offered a contract from a major company, and it's a name, image, likeness contract, not a pro contract. And that's very different. And the main difference in spirit is, or rather in application, is that a pro contract is performance sponsorship, essentially, where a name, image, likeness contract is everything except performance sponsorship. So in fact, they're not even allowed to do things like performance bonuses in an NIL. So if you make a world record, your NIL people will not give you a penny more or less than they did if you don't.
Well, maybe if they said, post this thing and include us now that you've won.
Yeah, but they can't do it. They can't tie it to the performance. Is what I'm saying. So there's a whole bunch of weird restrictions. That's a good example of there's scenarios here where they have to really have some strange restrictions. And so, as it were, then you get the dividing line in the NCAA where it's the athlete cannot promote their sponsor while on team time, practice, or competition. And remember, their school is likely to have a brand sponsor as well, so that brand sponsor gets promoted at team time and their personal sponsor gets promoted any other time, which in some cases is no problem. Take, for instance, Caitlin Toohey. Caitlin Toohey, when she was first offered her NIL contract from Adidas, happened to also be running for a school, NC State, that was sponsored by Adidas.
And remember, now she's
and now she has a pro contract from
Adidas.
So you could suggest here that part of the motivation clearly there was like a kind of this word has so much negative connotation, but it's a positive scenario here. They were grooming her for a professional relationship, and rightly so. One of the best of all time. We definitely want to have an active relationship before she's a professional athlete so that we are a natural choice for her when she makes that choice. And she did. And so, great. Caitlin Toohey's scenario makes sense. Parker Valby, similar scenario. She runs for Florida, who is sponsored by Nike, and her personal NIL contract is Nike. So, no surprise there. That's a logical choice for Nike to want to do that. But there are other situations that make a little bit less sense. For instance, Lex and Leo Young.
Tell us about it.
Tell us about it. So they run for Stanford. They are freshmen at Stanford. In fact, they only just finished their first semester at Stanford and
Freshies.
already have a name, image, likeness contract. There's a lot of interesting points around that. As you might guess, the name, image, likeness contracts, because of what we just described, have less to do with someone's performance accolades and a lot more to do with their social media attention, which goes to motivation number one that Outside Magazine shared. Social media matters more than anything else because that's where these athletes are receiving the most amount of attention. You think about, look at NCAA's viewership, like live in person and streaming viewership, and then look at Lex and Leo Young's YouTube subscriptions. Not even close. Like, isn't that crazy? Not even close. Lex and Leo Young get way more attention on YouTube than they'll ever get running in races in the NCAA. Therefore, On Athletics, when they decided to give an NIL deal to Lex and Leo Young, were gambling that that was a more profitable space for their brand than the other. But there's more to it, and that's what's so interesting here. That, in fact, is not necessarily as much a gamble as it sounds. A couple of reasons. First, there is precedence and potential for a change in this policy at the NCAA level. And here's where we understand this to come from. USA Track and Field, for instance, actually I think it's the case for all national level. Anyway, I don't know exactly how far this extends, but USA Track and Field has for years been sponsored by Nike as their brand sponsor, which means if you run
28 years or something like that.
If you run for Team USA at the World Championships or the Olympics or something, then you have to wear Nike uniform, which is the USA uniform. You don't get a choice. You don't say, oh, I want the Adidas version of the USA uniform because I'm sponsored by Adidas. No, it's all Nike. Well, that, as you might guess, has been a problem, a point of contention for pro athletes who are saying, why should I have to wear some other brand When I have a contract with this other one here, I should get to wear my brand. Well, we understand why we should probably wear matching uniforms because a
team.
It's a team, kind of. At least they're claiming it's a team, even though really it's just an individual sport. But the point is, yes, we get that. But what about the shoes? Well, it came to a head in part because of Nick Simmons, which we could go into a whole backstory.
Nick Simmons.
He's done so many interesting things, including auctioning off his shoulder for a tattoo for a brand. Whoever wants to pay me the most, I'll tattoo your company logo on my shoulder for the championships. I just thought that was the funniest. What a great move.
He's clever. He's creative.
He is a marketing maestro. But as it were, the policy changed in recent years where now pro athletes who have a shoe contract with some brand can wear that brand's shoes even at the World Championships. So they still have to wear the Nike uniform, but they can wear whatever shoes their brand gives them. Now, interestingly enough, if you're not professionally obligated to wear a brand shoes, then you still have to wear the Nike. So it's okay. Whatever.
I think everybody should be able to wear the footwear that works best for them. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, as it goes, you can see now the precedence exists for NCAA's policy to potentially shift where it says, okay, your brand sponsor for your school is not required if you have a personal sponsor for the shoes, for the footwear. Of course, they're going to still have to wear matching uniforms because, it's a team, kind of. But we get it. We could see a scenario where Lex and Leo Young, having been scooped up by On early in their career, may, in fact, see a day while they're still running at Stanford when they're wearing On shoes, even though it's a Nike school. So On is playing the long game there, and I think it's a very clever long game at that. But in their endeavor as a brand, they're really gambling on the fact that what brings the brand the most attention is not what's that athlete wearing in the NCAA championships, but rather what's that athlete talking about on their social media accounts.
Or YouTube channels. More importantly for Lex and
YouTube
Leo.
is social media. But yes, why anyone on the planet cares what Lex and Leo talk about on their YouTube account?
I mean,
I
probably
don't know.
think it would be interesting. I don't know. Who knows? People listen to us.
Yes, but there's a different reason. We are giving you information about how to better yourself in the sport. We are not just walking around talking about what we ate.
You don't know what you haven't watched.
You're right, I don't, because I don't watch it, because I don't pay attention to social media. Anyway, that's only even part of the picture. There's so much more going on here. And so as we say this, the whole thing is on the cusp of change at every moment in time. This whole NIL college sponsorship thing. Take into account the fact that there's a huge multi-billion-dollar lawsuit, class action lawsuit, from ex-NCAA athletes who are no longer collegiate, who are now suing the organization because, well, hey, I didn't get all that money, and they do now, and I want it, so you should give it to me, which is basically a summary of the lawsuit. Once again, I don't fully understand how that's possible. How is there even legal precedent? The ability to sue for a thing that you wish you should have gotten when you didn't, but someone else is now, is insane.
I have my 2 cents is that they likely signed a contract when they went to school, got their school paid for, got to run on a team. They knew what to expect going in. I doubt any of the universities were like, hey, you're going to get money through sponsorships while you're here with us. I don't think the colleges or universities promised any such thing. So now to ask for in retrospect is like, that person got something I wish I had. That's what it seems like to me. But of course, I haven't read all the fine print of this lawsuit, so we'll see. I'm
just shocked and appalled that it's even possible to have this lawsuit. But we don't know how it's going to end. Maybe at one point or another, the judge I don't know how these things are settled. How are class action lawsuits settled? They're so big. Anyway, who knows? We're going to follow that because we're really interested. And we're going to keep you posted because these things are fascinating. They are influencing the sport in ways we do not yet know exactly how it's going to affect. But it certainly is going to affect. And my hope is, with all the other weirdness and certainly plenty of negative potential things, that it just helps to further the sport, our sport of running, which is such an exciting thing for us. And we want to see it gain popularity and attention where it can. So we'll see, and we'll let you know.
And you let us know if you have questions, because we want to answer them on air. We also have loved having these guests on the show to further dive into effort-based training, what that looks like. And I loved how Laura put today about the satisfaction having this success-oriented training. We want you to feel that. We want you to thrive. And that's why we're here. That's why we show up every single week. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.